Alright, welcome to this 6th edition of Vloggerdome, the TV show. The subject is animal rights or vegetarianism, eh, animal rights in general, vegetarianism more specifically, probably, mostly. But you really can't separate the two subjects. You can't separate the fact that animals aren't just bricks. They're just, they're not rocks, they're not hammers, they're not nails. They're clearly alive, and they're alive in a lot of the ways we're alive, and that deserves respect. Yeah, that's really what it's about, respect. Anyway, so we're going to do something slightly different. It's not really different, just slightly different. And I make a lot of response videos on YouTube to characters, who make arguments, and then I make a counter argument. So I think we'll throw in some segments of how arguing goes on the internet. Yeah, some people say, it's not a good idea to argue on the internet because that's a way of just doing something futile and stupid. But we really don't have any other choice. Really. So anyway, let's play a little bit of this.
Is this thing on?
Joe Average.
Is it on?
Yes, it's on.
Alright, I'm making a video for this guy in Inmendham because for this vloggerdome thing, and because this guy is what I would call a carnivore racist.
Right. Yeah, see, it's okay, though, to like or dislike something for not good reasons. Now, so a racist is described as somebody who judges somebody based on the color of their skin. I'm making judgments based on a behavior that, in my opinion, is obscenely cruel. I mean, not just a little bit cruel, but like really preposterously stupid and cruel and completely unnecessary. And so you can't really call that a bigotry. I mean, I don't dislike carnivores because they smell bad, because they're generally stupid. I dislike them because they're stupid in a specific way. Stupid in a way that's just so obnoxious. It's insulting to my intelligence to pretend to be as stupid as people who defend eating meat are. I mean, the rationalizations are desperate rationalizations. They won't just admit, I think I'm really cool, I'm too busy, and too busy being cool to care about other things' welfare, and so I'll just take. I'm worth it. That's really all they're saying. I can torture sentient mammals because I'm worth it. Much like a god. Okay, so, and let's understand that this whole idea of eating meat and everything else is a tradition based on a religious notion that animals were placed there for our utility. Not that we were the smartest, the oldest child in the family, and that we should be demonstrating what it is to be intelligent. I'm sure if there was an alien race that came visiting Earth, and they did something as silly as come all the way across space just to use us as napkins or something, or toilet paper, that we would say, that's ludicrous, that's insane, you're supposed to be smart. Why would you diss us like that? Just because we can't calculate numbers as quickly as you, and we don't have as fancy, like say they had twice as many words in their vocabulary. Does that mean that they should look at us as if we're just garbage and nothing? So to look at animals as if they don't have a mammal brain, that are even birds, very clever animals, that they aren't driven by feelings, that they aren't constrained in how they behave based on feelings. If they get a thorn in their paw, they will limp, just like you. So anyway, we would expect much better from something smarter than ourselves, and here we are, the smartest of the kids of evolution, and what are we doing to our brothers and sisters? Treating them like they were, I don't know, bricks, which is really dumb. Sorry.
Okay, he thinks that it's not a good thing for us to be killing and eating meat. And,
Yeah, and no, yeah, that's right. You don't need to eat meat. That's clear. If intelligence had first arisen in some other organism, a Tyrannosaurus, for example, or something, I think you'd have the expectation that Tyrannosauruses would have to clean up their act to be intelligent, right? They would do the same things sophisticated, intelligent things do. They would find ways to clean up their lives to make them more civilized. They do certain things in private, and they would gain an appreciation for the fact that you don't want to do things sloppy and stupid, because that ends up just creating a bunch of unnecessary harm. They'd create rules about, standards for how you build a building so it doesn't fall down, so Tyrannosauruses don't get hurt, and all of that stuff. And I think you would have the expectation that they would grow past this native construction and say, we can do better than what nature made us. We can do this in a more humane way than chasing something down and chewing it to death. I think you would have that expectation. But again, see, it's about you. It's about the fact that you don't want to have the expectation placed on you. It's just an evasion of the obligations of being intelligent and realizing that it's just not free. This isn't free living. Free comes with responsibilities, and you have a responsibility to every sentient organism that is existing and that will exist. And that's just a rational fact. A rational fact you can't construct a rational statement disputing. The obligation exists, it's real, and you either satisfy it or you fail to satisfy it.
This Inmendham guy thinks we should all become vegetarians, and yeah.
Yeah, that's not entirely true. What I think you should become, is an advocate for responsible human behavior. Even if you're kind of a dumb person, like semi-ignorant, because you wasted your youth, you might still advocate that children be well educated, that they all go to college, that they do these things that are in the best interest of not only them, but the human race in general. I think even if you're a litter bug, you could say it's not a great idea if everybody litters, and you'd want people to have manners and not litter. I mean, even if you're somebody who's living a sloppy or a reckless life, you could advocate that somebody else not do that. You can be a heroin addict and say, don't let anyone get addicted to heroin. I have smoked cigarettes for 40 whatever years, and I would never advocate that somebody smoke cigarettes. I would, in fact, vote for death penalties for anybody who gave cigarettes to a minor. I think it's such a bad addiction, such a useless addiction. Yet I still do. I still take in nicotine in a different form than smoke, but because I'm addicted. And that's all you are if you're eating meat, at best. Okay, if you enjoy it, you enjoy it because you've been habitized to enjoy it. You've been constructed and taught to enjoy it. It was never necessary for you to eat meat, and you can rise above that. But it's not necessary that you do that to recognize and fulfill your responsibility to the truth, and advocate that people not raise people to be meat eaters if it can be easily avoided.
I don't like that. So I thought I'm gonna use my argumentation skills, and I'm just gonna kick his ass. Okay. All right. So hey there, Inmendham. Okay. My name, I guess I should say real quick too, is it's Butch McKillbison.
Right, so I can't make much out of that. But yeah, this is just kind of, you can just talk about traditions and classifications of people, right? That we are products of culture. And you could argue that this is a characterization of a human being, but it's not that far from the truth, in that we do fit into these categories. And these categories are completely none of them need to exist. It's like the existence of a particular football team or a particular baseball team. You can, as we have found out, you can just pull one out and put one in anytime you want. It really won't make any difference, these categories. So if there's some kind of human being, none of these kinds of human beings have to exist. If the Earth, the fact of the matter is we know that right now there's a billion plus people who are living on a basically a meatless diet, or a very low percentage of their diet contains meat. So it's very doable. It's easy to do. It's not hard to do. Your ability to metabolize calories is much easier eating other kinds of foods. Most meat is wasted when you eat it. You don't use it. Your body doesn't metabolize it, because your body basically isn't made to metabolize it. No body is. A carnivore's body isn't even made to metabolize it. It grabs the easy to grab calories from the fats and the other things, and most of it just throws out the other end. So it's inefficient even when you eat it. And then when you think of the cost of making proteins, making animal flesh, you can just think about how long it takes to grow an animal, and realize what an investment of energy there is in that pound of flesh you're eating. It has many pounds of grain that have been used to produce it. And so it's very inefficient in terms of a way of consuming the sun's energy. Yeah, so that's a lot of response for his name anyway. Yeah.
So people are telling me my entire life I'm a really good thinker. Okay, so I came up with a series of statements and maybe some questions. Okay, and I'm gonna say them, and then I'm sure Inmendham is just gonna be totally blown away. Okay, so human beings, okay, have got meat eating, in our DNA. Okay, it's in the DNA.
Yeah. So the argument from nature. First off, even if it was true that we were meat eaters, like a tyrannosaurus or a crocodile or something, it wouldn't be relevant to the fact that we could realize that our habit is a bad habit. And certainly if there was clearly a way for us to escape a bad habit, if we had a natural disposition that we found it to be unnecessarily cruel or nasty, like say some sort of say if in dating or something else, like animals, they have some really nasty traditions, like a male lion that takes over a pride may kill all the cubs from the previous lion. Okay, this is a genetic function. Now, wouldn't you expect, though, as if lions gained our intelligence, even though they might have an impulse to do it, they would realize that's uncivilized, it's indecent, it's inefficient, it's a waste of suffering, and they would find mechanisms to resist temptation, just as we find mechanisms to resist temptation all the time. We might have a thought, we might be inspired to do something, and we will say, that's just disgusting and stupid, and we won't do it because we realize it's just wrong.
We got steak and bacon and pork chops and fish sticks. I got a couple of fish sticks all through me. My doctor told me I got fish sticks all over the place. My doctor said last time.
All right. Maybe. So anyway, yeah. So I guess the only point I can make out of this is how far down the scale do we go, and what organisms are worth this consideration. And so yeah, that might be. It takes a little bit of an understanding of biological science and whatnot to be able to figure out where sentience begins, where the first ouch exists, whether fish feel, for example. In some sort of substantial way. So many people will associate feeling with thinking, and they think the more the animal thinks, then the more it feels. And there isn't any reason to connect those two things. I might argue, and I have argued, without any without any material evidence, just the evidence of, yeah, it sort of sounds right, that human beings are actually less sensitive because we have given up sense data, perception of the feelings. You can look at our sense of smell is much less than most other animals, and that the point is that we actually had to sacrifice some portion of our sense perception to do this intelligence thing, so that we gave up some sense intensity to be able to think, to gain vocabulary and have these conversations about symbolic ideas. So, this idea that you're feeling more because you're human is just something you like to think is true, but there's no evidence of it being true. And there might be sensible reason to believe that in the construction of this consciousness mechanism, and it is a biological construction, not a God-given construction, that there might be some imbalances in the process of this evolution, and that some animals might be feeling quite intensely and have no way to really express that, no other way than the same way we have, which is to appear terrified. But it's just wrong to think that because you have a smarter brain that you have a greater capacity to be tormented. Torture may go all the way down to insects. It's a frightening thought, but it may do that. And if that's the truth, are we supposed to just pretend it's not? Is that what being intelligent is pretending something that might be true isn't true? Or is it our responsibility to say, maybe we got to know this for sure before we just keep doing something that may be horrifically damaging and destructive to the welfare of beings that are in fact more delicate than we are, more capable of being tortured.
I'm actually, I'm living in this bathroom right now because I can't afford my house. I lost my house because I gotta have fish stick removal. It's, my kids, they don't.
Yeah. So yeah, this is sort of conventional and cliche for human beings, right? I mean, we all get into our messes and we all get into our struggles and we all have our problems, and then we just start making excuses for all the things we don't do right, because everybody else is doing it too. See, we have that to compare ourselves to, some mess, and we say, well, as long as we're doing better than this other jerk, then we're somehow good enough. So as long as you pet your dog and give him a treat now and then, you're going to say, I'm a good person. And that's probably not even close to good enough. Well, I know it's not good enough. You have to do better than that. You have to do better than what's convenient. And when you don't do better than what's convenient, you have to just acknowledge that the flaw is in you and that the flaw isn't in the reality. And the reality doesn't give you reason to say, I'm still a good guy, or I'm a great guy, or I'm doing good, or I'm just fine. No, you just got to admit that we got to do better than this, or we have no reason to be doing anything at all.
I don't like the way I smell. And, it's just like real hot. It's real hot. But the one thing, and I don't know how much longer I am for this world, but I gotta make sure people keep on killing and eating animals. It's what drives me.
Well, that's probably an exaggeration. But yeah, obviously people just want to. You want to maintain the facade of credibility. So it's like people who defend religion who don't really believe in God, but they defend religion because they love the traditions. They think the morality does people some good, even though it's false, and from a false, it's a false construction of morality or ethics. But they just feel like they're too connected to it. They're too much a part of it to say the whole thing is nonsense. So it's kind of like they get invested in it. And it's like you could imagine somebody buying a bunch of baseball cards or something you could think of, and even if they start to dislike baseball, they're invested. And so they might defend baseball and might, because they want to maintain the value of what they're invested in. So even though it's just card collecting for them now, they're still going to defend the sport because it has a side effect that they're stuck in. And that's could be argued that there could be people who are advocates for the decent treatment of animals, but they can't take it that step further because that's the part they're vulnerable on, because now they have to actually do something, and doing something is a lot harder than just saying something. And saying something is hard when you know that the implications of what you're saying is, yeah, I'm a hypocrite. You know, who wants to admit that?
Okay, but this is another one. I thought really hard about this. Okay, look at my fangs. Okay, look at my fangs. See my fangs? You can see. Wait, see? You see my fangs? You see them? I got fangs. You see my fangs? Okay, well, I was meant. Okay, so you see my fangs. Okay, you see them. You see the fangs.
All right. So this is always an argument that people bring up, is that we're somehow constructed to eat meat, but it just seems kind of funny just when you start to think about it and you start imagining human beings trying to chase down almost any kind of animal and having any success at it whatsoever, and then using our rather small teeth to rip fur and hard hide off of an animal to get to its flesh, and then somehow eat the flesh without rupturing organs that will create all kinds of poisons. It just seems kind of impractical for us human beings to be carnivores. We aren't made for it. We don't have the digestive system for it. We have a digestive system consistent with every other animal that's a vegetarian, and it's completely inconsistent with every animal that is a carnivore. Carnivores have short intestinal tracts. We have a long intestinal tract. These little facts are just facts. And the fact that you have canine teeth is more evidence of the fact that animals have to defend themselves against each other. Okay, gorillas have monstrous jaws and teeth, and all they do is eat leaves. Okay, and but they do fight with each other, and that's why the teeth are there. Same with orangutans. They have very flat teeth, much like humans, except when they go through a metamorphosis of alpha male, and then they will gain very pronounced canine teeth. But this, you know, the argument from biology is always going to fail, because there's just not one bit of our biology that's at all makes us appear like we have been a traditional carnivorous animal. And every attribute we have is an indication that we have, for a long biological time in history, been eating something else. Yeah, well, there's no need to get to that yet.
I was meant to tear flesh apart, to drink blood. I mean, deep down. Okay, look at this. I'm like, look at you. Okay, we were meant to be lions. Okay, lions. Okay, eating meat and hunting for to eat the meat.
Okay, so yeah, it's funny. But anyway, so something that just occurred to me tonight. Was just thinking about the shape of our face, and our noses are kind of pronounced, and that seems kind of silly, right? I mean, evolutionarily, it just seems like a target. But thinking about it, that is the difference in our physique from the other simians, is that our jaw has retracted. It's not that our nose grew, it's that our jaw retracted. And that's what changed our face. That's what makes the biggest difference in our face from the other great apes, is their jaw. And so why would their jaw change? I guess you could ask a question like that. And it might be just about fire, just about the fact that once you have fire, and tools, smashing tools, that you no longer need a big jaw, but you don't have to crack big hard nuts. you just don't have the same obligation in terms of trying to rip your environment to pieces. And clearly, in the fact that we no longer, once you have tools, you don't fight with each other with your teeth, where every other animal has to fight with its teeth or a weapon. And ours were no longer a weapon once we learned to pick up a stick, and once we learned to put a rock on the end of the stick. You didn't have to bite your enemy anymore. Not until you beat him senseless with a stick, I guess. So anyway, so that, you know, it's just that's a simple explanation. Might not be the truth, might not be reality, but it does give you a diagram that why something is the way it is. You know, it's more complicated than just saying, well, we traditionally did it, which means we did it for 50 years, or 100 years, or 2,000 years. I mean, you know, evolution works on a much larger scale. And yeah, that's probably enough.
And eating the meat is spiritual, okay? Alright, Jesus wants me to be a meat eater.
Right. So it's kind of an interesting subject, the whole religion thing, and the fact that that's where it started, so to speak, in the sense that that's where the rationalization started, and that's where the cultural manifestation started. And clearly, part of religion is kind of ironic, is that they found that there was these problems associated with domestic animals. I mean, they did cause diseases, and so many religions started making it part of the religion that God said, don't do that, or prepare meat a certain way to protect against its soilage, its destruction by bacterial poisons. Because they didn't know what bacteria was, but they could understand that certain things prevented the, you know, demon poisoning from taking place. And clearly cooking, it's all about cooking. It's all about fire. So I guess the biggest thing you can see between the difference between some preposterous idea that we would eat raw meat, which is virtually impossible for us to eat raw meat unless you do it as a complete diet and your body metabolism completely adapts to it. You can't process raw meat. It'll go right through you. Your body will reject it. They introduced steak tartare, you know, uncooked beef, in America as a dietary solution for gross obesity. You weren't going to be, you weren't going to, it wasn't a healthy diet. Raw meat is not a healthy diet. So clearly cooking is what makes meat something that we turned it into candy. We've processed it. Cooking is processing. And clearly it's only through that processing that meat becomes any kind of realistic thing for human beings to be eating. So yes, we're capable of eating more than just fruit, or more than just vegetables, or tubers, or, you know, even sticks. Certain kinds of sticks are edible. Pandas eat bamboo. Yeah, our body is capable of adapting to different kinds of things, and cooked meat is certainly a lot less of an adaptation than raw meat. So you really just can't make a rational argument that eating raw meat was our tradition, because it wasn't. And it's just about fire and processing, and that's the only thing that made it possible for human beings to practically eat flesh of other mammalian organisms. And let's understand, there are other mammals. So in effect, this really is a kind of cannibalism. It's clearly worse than slavery. It's a gross usury for your traditional convenience. I mean, there's nothing defendable in this bad habit, and it's just a bad habit.
Another thing I want to ask this Inmendham guy is, you know, how do you get your protein? Because the protein is so important. I mean, how do you get your B12? Where do you get your iron?
Well, those are three questions. Well, anyway, iron's sort of irrelevant. You get that anywhere. Protein, it's not something you necessarily need, but certainly there's other sources of protein in the sense that there's lots of environmental goodies. The bears, for example, you know, the substance of their meat is salmon or fish, and some of them don't fish, so yeah, they're basically vegetarian. and they get their vitamins from the environment. They eat different things, and different things have different vitamins and minerals, and that's where they get the ones they need. But your body makes most of what you need. And B12, for example, it's a fairly necessary component to what we've evolved to use in our bodies, and it's necessary. And the reason why it exists is the expectation that it would always be in our environment is that it was always in the environment. It's all over the place because bacteria produce it. So it's in the dirt. It's in almost everything that would be raw in the environment. So anything you ate that was raw, you'd be getting B12 in. And it's only when we cleaned up our lives and started eating processed food that B12 became some issue for people who didn't eat meat, because meat still had it in it, because meat is full of bacterial byproducts. So it's not like you need a source of this beyond the fact that you just have to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, we don't eat a lot of dirt in our environment. We certainly don't clean bugs off of each other and eat them like other simians do. So yes, if we need a source of B12, you might need to augment your diet with a vitamin pill if you're strictly vegan. But it's not even true if you're just aware of the fact that there's lots of fruits and lots of vegetables that do have enough B12 in them to satisfy your daily requirements, or weekly requirements, more realistically.
Where do you get your omega-3? Because you can't make it through the day without this stuff. Another thing too is this bullshit about animals feeling. Okay, animals can't feel. Okay, they don't care about where we put them. Okay, they're lucky to have us. This is the thing that I don't think this Inmendham guy understands, is that animals are lucky to have us. We're looking after them. Okay, we're making sure that they're not going to go extinct. Okay.
Yeah. The argument from trust me, I'm doing it for you. No natural animal, I don't think. The animals aren't capable of even understanding their own mortality, let alone understanding a concept like extinction. So I don't think they could possibly express an opinion on that subject. And if they did, it would probably be the same kind of opinion that a human expresses, which is something out of ego, not out of reason. We think our family's better than those people, and we think our race is better than those people, and we think, people do that, and that's their ego, not their rationality talking. And animals really don't need us. Clearly, many animals, depending on how the animal lives, some live better or worse, but they still all live in a pretty harsh natural environment that kills 9 out of 10 children. It's what nature does. Nature kills 9 out of 10 children. And so it's not like nature is wonderful, and it's not like that might be another argument to maybe made by Bubba Beefsteak or not, I'm not sure. But the argument that it's already so bad in nature that us killing animals is no big deal because they're going to die anyway. But the fact is, they're not gonna live in a tiny little cage, and they're not gonna be whipped or beaten or left in their own filth, to die of an infection. At least in nature, they're given at least the cruelty in nature doesn't have an intelligent motive behind it, which it seems like that's not much of a difference, but I would prefer to be killed by something too stupid to know better rather than something smart enough to know better.
Without us, they wouldn't be here anymore, okay?
Yeah, well, one could argue that animals like rodents might be better off not being here anymore, and certainly the ones being used in our medical experiments certainly would be better off, I think, not being here anymore. If I was to be projected to be one of their kind, and to have the lot of life in the medical laboratory, I certainly wouldn't. You'd have to pay me an awful lot of money to play that game. You'd have to promise me an awful lot of paradises. to say, yeah, go ahead, sew somebody's ear on my butt. No, I don't think so.
And so we're looking after them. We're giving them food. Okay, we're like, they get to have like sex sometimes and stuff. I think if they're not gonna get to have any sex.
Yeah, well, they get to have it, but yeah, they have it with a stick, or some other instrument at our when we feel like imposing it. Um, but yeah, it's just brutal in most cases. Most meat, 90% of it is created out of brutality, out of a harsh brutality that sentient organisms have to live through and then die. And the death is probably the best part of their existence, is that they're finally put out of their misery. But it's a misery we create by the demand we impose, and it's clearly, again, pointing to nature and saying, well, nature sucks so we can suck. That's not a rational argument. It's a rationalization.
Maybe we got something to think about, as far as how we're treating the animals. Because, well, they don't feel, so they don't have sex.
Yeah, they don't feel argument is just kind of silly, right? I mean, should anybody give that even, should anybody even have to counter argue an argument that somebody might make that animals don't feel? I mean, it's so inconsistent with every sensible fact gleaned over the last 200 years that it's just so ludicrous and so preposterous an argument to make that, yeah, should anybody take it seriously? I don't think so.
It's a lapse in my logical, assessment of the situation. I'm sorry about that. But what I'm saying is that, they're lucky to have us. Okay, they like where they are. They like what we're doing. And I think, honestly, okay, if you...
Yeah. Well, I mean, you would do this, the reactions would be the same. Let's say if I kept you in a dungeon and I mistreated you and kept you horribly, but every day, I showed up and gave you a treat to eat or some other thing, you might wag your tail and say, and for a moment you would, all of that would evaporate and you'd be in your little rainbow paradise for a few moments, but then the grind of your reality would come back and start, your fetters you'd start to feel the pain again. But anyway, that's enough.
If you asked this chicken, this drummy, okay, you asked this drummy if in its life, if you could go back to where before it was a drummy, okay, and you asked the drummy, are you happy knowing now? What I'm about to tell you, and what I'm about to tell you is that you died to be delicious. I just don't understand how there could be any other reaction to that, to say that. I would like to die delicious, okay? I would like to die delicious.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people say things, but do they really mean them? A lot of people say it's all worth it or this is all that. I could make the argument. Would you accept the worst? So if you're going to advocate for some risk, and I spell out what the worst case scenario is, that's really what you're advocating for, is the worst case scenario, right? You're saying even if that happens, it's good enough. And it seems a simple argument to make, but would you really want to be the sentient pig in the tiny cage, in the filth, in the horror? Would you accept that as a life and say that, yeah, you can go ahead and mix that in with your privilege as a human being, and if you mix those two things together, you're going to get some kind of decent color, or you're going to get something foul? Isn't it going to poison the well? Yeah, I think so.
Hey, Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Hey, watch this.
Yeah. So this is part of what happens when you do want to argue these things. People are so defensive and so protective of their own religion or their own team or their own attitude or their own sense of what character is, that they will just mock, just play with it. Like, here, I can get to you. I'll mock suffering. I'll mock torture. I'll glibly trespass on something like that. It's people do all kinds of, people protest at people's funerals or something. I mean, people can just be so rude and so obnoxious, but not to acknowledge that this is a subject that matters, because it involves the only thing that really does matter, which is the welfare of things that can feel. I mean, anybody who can't take the prospect or the possibility of torture seriously is seriously broken. I mean, if you can't take the idea that it may be torture, if you can't take that seriously, if you can't figure out that now I have to be a little more careful because torture is a possibility, what can I say? I mean, isn't that failure as an intelligence? I mean, that really can't be called intelligence. Intelligence ignores the possibility of torture? No.
You like that? You like it? Vegans are too preachy, okay? They're intolerant. I mean, they're obnoxious. I mean, can't they just shut up? I mean, didn't their mamas ever tell them that they gotta clean everything off their plate, okay?
Well, whatever. See, but yeah, that's the thing. It'd just be cliches and empty rhetoric. Yeah, there's always something obnoxious in having to tell somebody else, don't fart in my face or something, or something that seems obvious, and that it gets kind of patronizing and dismissive, and yeah, so anybody can get that way, high-minded, arrogant. All that stuff is a reality of any argument between people, especially an argument about something so personal and something so potentially horrible. When you're arguing, what I'm saying to you is that you're guilty of committing an act of torture against innocent sentiences. How this is described is, yeah, that's going to be obnoxious if you have a sense of the fact that you have more character than that you're better than that. But I'm saying that the facts point to the reality is, sorry, that's what you are. And not only are you guilty of perpetrating the act, you're defending it and endorsing it and perpetuating it, which makes you somebody who's don't only. It's not like you're not like just some slave owner who inherited slaves and is just kind of stuck, not knowing what to do about it. You're an advocate for it. You're defending it, and you're perpetuating it. That's a lot different.
What's wrong? What's wrong, vegetarians? What's wrong, vegans? Don't you know how to clean your plate? Another thing about this vegetarian thing is that, okay, look at me. Okay, I'm healthy. Okay, I'm healthy because I eat meat. Okay, you can't be a healthy human being and not eat meat. Okay, look, I'm still good.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's another kind of funny argument. But yeah, look, if this society cared, if it didn't want, it doesn't really want the answer to this question, okay? Because obviously most people eat meat and they really don't want to know, okay, the truth. And so it's always about propaganda of one kind or another. So we don't get a lot of really great information about what really is healthy and what really isn't healthy. But what information is out there, what surveys that have been done, they clearly indicate that, yeah, you'll live healthier, I mean less expensively in terms of you'll have less diseases and less conditions, and you'll live longer not eating meat. It doesn't do your body good. It does your body bad, because your body really doesn't want the trouble of having to metabolize all those complex proteins to get the stuff that it really feeds on, which is sugar. Your body does simple chemistry to make all this movement happen. All this energy comes out in forms of much simpler chemistry. And so your body, to do anything with this other stuff, it has to expend energy to break down the energy that you're eating. So when you eat a bunch of complex proteins, your body has to work to break those down. And you can sort of see it when you think about trying to get grease off of dishes and other things. It can be very difficult to even get it off of surfaces. It's so sticky and gooey and complex. And yeah, your body really doesn't, your body has to work to process it. And it's expensive to your body's function. It just basically can wear your body out and cause disease.
How strong I am, okay? I'm as strong as the oxen I eat, you know? And you just need it to be healthy, okay?
Are you as brave as the chickens you eat? Anyway.
What we need as human beings, and you just need it to be alive, and you need it a lot, okay? You know? Human beings have been eating meat for like hundreds of years, and so what?
Yeah, hundreds. Yeah, we probably have been eating meat for hundreds of years, and that's all it's been. You know, a few thousands. Many thousands maybe. Like I said, since the invention of realistic or reliable fire, meat has probably been part of diets. But you know, I can make a quick argument about the battle between Neanderthal and the final human progression into Europe, and what made the difference between these two competing human models. One succeeded, one failed. One took over the world, and one took over nothing and went extinct. One ate meat primarily. Their 5-year-olds would be the size of the other's 9-year-olds. The others grew much slower and primarily cut grass for food. Yeah, and which one won? But it may not have anything to do with that, because obviously we're not going to know exactly what the drama was between those two species. But the big guys who ate a lot of meat did lose. And that seems sort of important.
I stop now, you know, we got a good thing going, and why stop? You know, it's just become a tradition, it's our identity, you know, why the hell, why that, you know, I just don't understand why these people...
Yeah, it's become a tradition, and that's all it is. And so slavery was a tradition. There's lots of bad, you know, let's not even go into all the traditional roles we have had for women through even the brief recorded history, let alone what went on thousands of years ago, many thousands of years ago. So yeah, tradition is about the lamest of arguments you can make. Defend anything from tradition is to basically say I'm too stupid, you know, to find a fact, and so I'll just do something desperate and say everybody else is doing it, and that's all tradition is. It really doesn't mean anything.
You know, wanna lay these guilt trips on me and make me feel bad about who I am.
Right. Well, okay, that's not really what I want to do, and I don't think most vegans want to do that, and most people arguing for the rights of animals want to do that. I don't even want us to dull or slow down medical research by not exploiting animals, because it would maybe slow down progress. I don't want that to happen. But the truth is, I personally can't justify torturing something for some benefit I receive. I can't see any logic in it. I can't see how it can possibly be a rational gain. How can I destroy something or harm something or hurt something and say I'm profiting? You know, because I feel good? That I'm so much more important. I'm more important enough to justify torture. I'm doing something important enough to justify torture. I can't see how any human being can rationally defend their life in that circumstance. How they can possibly come up with some explanation of what good they're going to do in the world in terms of preventing harm to justify the harm they're causing. Can't be done. So anyway, probably enough for this. And so we'll let Buffalo Bill get back to whatever it is he's going to get back to. And I will also move on. Till next time. Mostly.